The morning light was still pale and thin when Amara Cole left the gravel path and pushed through the ferns at the eastern edge of Ridgewood State Park. She was 8 years old, small for her age, and absolutely certain that the sound she had heard was not a deer. Deer did not groan. Deer did not rattle metal against bark with a sound like a slow, broken bell. She had been looking for the red salamander she had spotted the week before, the one with 3 orange spots on its back, and she had wandered maybe 40 feet off the marked trail when the groaning reached her again. It was low and rough, like a sound dragged out of something enormous. She stood still among the ferns and waited, the way her mother had taught her to wait when she was unsure, and then she saw him. He was chained to the largest oak in that part of the park, a tree so wide 2 adults could not touch hands around it. The chain looped around the trunk and around both of his wrists, holding his arms out and back at a painful angle. He was the biggest man Amara had ever seen in her 8 years. He was taller than her mother's doorframe by what looked like a whole head, and his shoulders were the width of a doorframe too. His arms, stretched back behind him, were covered from the wrists to where his shirt began in tattoos so dense they looked like dark sleeves woven from ink. His head was down. Dark short hair fell across his forehead, and his face was turned slightly away from her, jaw set, eyes shut tight. He wore a plain white shirt, now torn at one shoulder, and dark jeans. His boots were expensive. He was breathing in long, controlled pulls, like someone who had decided that breathing carefully was the only job left in the world. Amara stood at the edge of the fern line and watched him for a full minute. She was afraid. She knew she was afraid because her heart was doing the fast flutter thing it did before her school recitals. But she also noticed that he had not moved to look at her, which meant he did not know she was there, which meant she had a choice. She could leave. She could go back to the trail, find her mother on the bench by the parking lot, and tell her what she had seen. That was the sensible thing. Her mother was sensible. Her mother wore emerald green cardigans and carried a first aid kit in her purse and always said that caution was a kindness you gave yourself. Amara stayed. She crouched down among the ferns so that only her eyes and her 2 dark hair puffs were above the green line, and she studied him some more. His wrists were raw where the chain pressed. There was a scrape on his jaw. He was very still, but she could see the effort that stillness cost him, the slow clench of his jaw, the controlled exhale. He was not unconscious. He was managing. She said very quietly, "Are you stuck?" He went completely rigid. His head came up so fast she flinched backward into the ferns. He had dark brown eyes, so dark they were nearly black, and they swept the tree line with a speed that told her he had been trained to look for threats. When they landed on her, crouched among the plants with only her puffs and her eyes showing, he stopped. Stare. Said nothing for 3 long seconds. Then he said in a voice like gravel rolling in a barrel, "Yes. I am stuck." She considered this. "Does it hurt?" "Some." She straightened up out of the ferns and took 3 careful steps closer. She stayed out of arm's reach, not because she thought he would grab her but because her mother had taught her that arm's reach was the line you did not cross with strangers. "How long have you been here?" He looked up through the oak canopy at the light. "Since yesterday evening." She calculated in her head. That was a long time to be chained to a tree. That was longer than a whole school day and then a sleep and then most of a morning. Her heart did the flutter thing again, but this time it felt less like fear and more like decision. "I will go get help," she said. "But I will come back first and tell you I am going so you are not scared." He looked at her for a moment as if she had said something in a language he knew but had not heard spoken in a very long time. Then he said very quietly, "Okay." She went back to the trail, walked the full length to where it curved near the east parking lot, and found her mother exactly where she expected. On the green-painted bench, reading a paperback, wearing her sapphire blue jacket over a white blouse, her auburn hair tucked behind one ear. Brianna Cole looked up when she heard the crunch of her daughter's steps on the gravel and felt the particular quality of stillness in Amara's face that always meant something serious had happened. "There is a man," Amara said. "He is chained to a tree. He has been there since yesterday." Brianna closed her book without marking her page. She stood up. "Show me where." Brianna followed Amara back along the trail and then off it into the ferns, her paperback tucked under her arm, her practical flats not at all suited for undergrowth but carrying her through it anyway. Amara moved with the confidence of someone who had already memorized this route, which Brianna realized meant her daughter had been here before. She filed that thought away to address later. When the oak came into view and the man chained against it came into view as well, Brianna stopped walking. She had worked the intake desk at a community clinic for 4 years. She had seen hurt people. She had seen people who looked dangerous and were not, and people who looked harmless and were. She had developed what her coworker called her reading eye, which was just her way of saying she paid attention to the whole person rather than just the first impression. What she read now was this: the man was enormous, tattooed, and had clearly not slept. He was holding himself upright through will alone, not through any physical comfort, because physical comfort was not available to him. He was looking at her daughter with an expression that was not threatening. It was closer to careful. The kind of careful a large animal uses when a small creature approaches, where the instinct to move is overridden by the understanding that moving would cause harm. Amara had reached the edge of the fern line and turned back. "I told you I would come back," she said, addressing the man directly with the seriousness of someone fulfilling a contract. He said in that low barrel voice, "You did." Brianna stepped forward until she stood beside her daughter. The man's eyes moved to her face. She met them steadily. "My name is Brianna. This is my daughter Amara. Who did this to you?" "People I had a disagreement with." "That is a careful answer." "I am trying to be careful around your daughter." Brianna noted that. She pulled out her phone. "I'm going to call for help. Is there someone I should call specifically, or should I call the county emergency line?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you call the county line, the wrong people will hear the frequency and come here before the right people do. There is a number I can give you if you have something to write with." Amara immediately produced a short pencil and a folded piece of notebook paper from her jacket pocket in the way that children who love collecting things always have exactly the right tool available. She held them out to Brianna, who crouched down and wrote the number the man recited from memory. "Ask for Sal," he said. "Tell him Enzo is at the East Oak in Ridgewood. He will know what to do." "Enzo," Brianna repeated, testing the name. "Enzo Marchetti." He said it without any particular weight, as if the name were simply information and not the name of the man who ran the largest organized charitable motorcycle club on the eastern seaboard, which was, as Brianna would learn in the next 48 hours, exactly what it was. She stood up and stepped away to make the call. Amara stayed. Brianna watched from 10 feet away as her daughter crouched in the ferns and began a quiet, steady conversation with the chain giant at the oak tree, and felt the particular terror of a parent watching their child do something brave. The phone rang twice before a man with a thick, tired voice answered. "Yeah. I am looking for Sal," Brianna said. "I have a message about Enzo. He is at the East Oak in Ridgewood State Park. He said you would know what to do." There was a sharp sound on the other end, like a chair being pushed back hard. Then the voice said, "Is he alive?" And the question was stripped of everything except the core of it, the fear underneath, the thing a person asks when they have been afraid of the answer for a long time. "He is alive," Brianna said. "He needs the chain cut. He has been there since yesterday evening." Sal said, "We are coming. Do not leave him. Please." The please landed unexpectedly. It was not the please of someone asking a favor. It was the please of someone who had been searching and had just been given a direction to run. "We will stay," Brianna said and ended the call. While they waited, Amara did what Amara always did in situations that required patience. She talked. She told the man chained to the oak tree about the red salamander with 3 orange spots. She told him about her school's spring project, which was building a model of the local watershed, and about how her partner in the project kept wanting to paint the river blue when rivers were not actually blue. They were various shades of brown and green and gray depending on the light and the sediment, and she felt strongly that accuracy mattered even in school projects. Enzo Marchetti listened. He did not perform listening the way adults sometimes did with children, nodding at intervals while looking elsewhere. He actually listened, his eyes on her face tracking the details. Occasionally he asked a question that proved he had heard the previous sentence, not just the general subject. "What color did you paint it?" he asked about the river. "A mix," Amara said. "Mostly gray-green. My partner said it was ugly. I said real things are not always pretty, and that is the whole point of a model, to show the real thing." She paused. "Our teacher said I was right." She paused again. "I did not say that to be mean. I just think accuracy matters." Enzo said very carefully, as if he were trying the idea out, "I agree with you." Brianna, standing at the edge of the clearing and monitoring the trail entrance, listened to this exchange and felt something shift in her chest that she could not quite name. By the time she heard movement on the trail, Amara had run out of river project details and had moved to the topic of her upcoming 8th birthday. Enzo, who had been awake for more than 30 hours and was running on sheer will and the distraction of a child's voice, had managed to ask the correct question. "What do you want for your birthday?" Amara thought about it seriously. "A real birthday," she said. "We moved here 3 months ago and I do not know anyone yet. Last year we moved too, so there was not a real birthday then either. I would like a birthday with people in it." Enzo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You will have one." He said it with the exact same tone he used for everything else, which was the tone of a man who said what he meant and expected the world to organize itself accordingly. Brianna turned at the sound of boots on gravel. 3 men emerged from the trail line and stopped at the side of the clearing. The one in front was stocky, gray at his temples, with a short beard that was more gray than black. He wore a dark jacket with a small embroidered patch on the chest. He saw Enzo and for a moment his face did something complicated and then settled back into calm. "Boss," he said. He said it the way you say the name of someone you were afraid you would never see again. Enzo said, "Sal. You took long enough." Sal crossed the clearing in about 4 strides and crouched to examine the chain while the other 2 men took positions at the clearing's edges, watching the tree line. Sal looked at the lock, looked at the chain, stood up and looked at Brianna. "You called," he said. "My daughter found him," Brianna said. Sal looked at Amara. Amara looked back at him with the measuring patience of an 8-year-old who was deciding whether an adult was worth her time. Whatever she decided, it seemed to land in his favor because she said, "He has been here since yesterday evening. He needed company." Sal's mouth pressed together for a moment. Then he said, "He did. Thank you." Amara considered this. "You are welcome," she said. Then she looked at Enzo. "I am going to call you Bear," she announced. "Because you are very big and you live in the woods and you seem scary but you are actually nice." Enzo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Sal. Sal was looking carefully at the chain. There was a tension in the line of Sal's back that suggested he was trying not to laugh. Enzo said to Amara, "Okay." Sal's bolt cutters were in the bag he had brought, thick-handled and commercial grade, the kind used for industrial work. Even with them the chain took several minutes. It was heavy galvanized steel, looped twice around the oak and secured with a padlock that Sal cut through with a grunt of effort. The chain fell away from Enzo's wrists in sections, and Enzo did not move for a moment after it was gone, as if his body needed to receive the news that the weight had lifted before it could act on it. Then he pushed off the oak with both hands and straightened to his full height, and Brianna, who was 5 feet and 6 inches tall and had never felt particularly small, understood for the first time what people meant when they said a person filled a space. He was not threatening. He was simply large in the way that certain things in nature are large, oak trees and coastal cliffs, present without apology. He rolled his wrists slowly. The skin was abraded in rings where the chain had pressed. He looked at Sal. "How many know I was missing?" 2012 members of the club as of the count this morning, Sal said. Plus law enforcement contacts. Plus the hotel group's board. Plus Deputy Marsh, who was helpful once we explained the situation. He paused. "Everyone was looking, boss." Enzo looked out through the tree canopy at the sky. Then he looked at Brianna. "I need to ask you something." "You can ask," she said. "I am not in any condition to go to my own place tonight. My place is 3 hours away and Sal's car is 40 minutes from here. Is there somewhere close I can sit down and be quiet for a few hours before I decide what comes next?" It was, Brianna thought, one of the more honest requests she had ever received. He was not asking to come home with her. He was asking if there was anywhere nearby that was safe and quiet. Those were 2 different requests. She was aware of that distinction and aware that he had phrased it the less presumptuous way. She said, "We have a rented house on Maple Lane about 12 minutes from here. It has a couch that is too short for you but the guest room has a proper bed. You can make that call from there." Amara, who had been standing close enough to hear all of this, said, "Bear can have my extra pillow. It is very good." Enzo looked at Amara. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was not in any way ironic, which was the right response and the one that settled something in Brianna's calculation of him. They walked out of the park together, Sal and the 2 other club members spreading out at a distance that was simultaneously natural and deliberate, the kind of position people take when they are protecting someone without wanting to make a production of it. Amara walked beside Enzo and asked him if he had ever seen a salamander, and he said he had not, and she said she would show him one someday because they were important and people overlooked them. "People overlook a lot of things," Enzo said. "Yes," Amara agreed with the gravity of someone who had thought this through. "That is a problem." Brianna walked slightly ahead, her sapphire jacket catching the morning light. She was thinking about the practical things, the logistics of fitting a man the size of a doorframe into a rented house built for normal-sized people, about whether she had enough food, about what she would tell her sister when her sister called at noon the way she always did on Saturdays. She was also thinking about the pleas that Sal had said on the phone. About the 2,000 members who had been searching. About an 8-year-old's instinct that had been, as far as she could tell, completely correct. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Maple Lane had never seen so many motorcycles. They came in groups of 3 and 4, parking in a long careful line along the street outside the rented house, their riders cutting their engines one by one so that the sound faded in waves rather than all at once. Brianna stood at the front window and watched them arrive and thought, in a distant, slightly amazed way, that she had not expected Saturday to go like this. Sal had explained it on the drive over. The Marchetti Riders, legally incorporated as a charitable organization, was the longest-running community motorcycle club on the Eastern Seaboard. 2012 registered members. Annual toy drive, hospital fundraisers, veterans transport program. Enzo had built it from 40 members 7 years ago, during the same period when he had been quietly, systematically moving the Marchetti family's interests from the old business to the hotel group and the club's charity arm. He did not do it fast, Sal said from the back seat, addressing Brianna in the front passenger seat while Enzo sat beside him with his wrists wrapped in the first aid kit Brianna had retrieved from her purse without comment. He did it right. Every year a little more clean, a little more legal. The hotel group has 12 properties now. All legitimate. All above board. And the old business? Brianna asked. He walked away from it. Which is why the people who chained him to that tree were angry. Enzo, who had been looking out the window, said, Conrad Hale wanted to use the club's transport network for his operation. I said no. He thought chaining me in the park for a few days would change my answer. It did not. It never would have, Sal said, with a certainty that made it clear this was not the first time he had made this observation about his boss. At the house, Brianna had put Enzo in the guest room with Amara's extra pillow and the instruction to sleep. He had been asleep in 4 minutes. She knew because she had checked, the way you check on someone when you are not sure they are actually safe yet. While he slept, the riders came. Sal coordinated them from the front porch. Some brought food, covered dishes in quantities suited for feeding a small gathering, which was what this had become. A woman in a maroon riding jacket brought medical supplies and introduced herself as Petra Vasquez, club physician, calm-voiced and efficient, who asked Brianna a series of questions about Enzo's condition with the brisk care of someone who had done field triage before. Amara sat on the porch railing and watched all of them with the focused attention she gave to things she wanted to understand. She asked each person who climbed the porch steps the same question. How long have you known Bear? The answers ranged from 3 years to the full 7, and without exception every person paused at the name Bear and then looked at Brianna with an expression that Brianna could not quite read. Sal, when she asked him about it, said simply, he has never had a nickname. Not in all the years I have known him. Brianna considered that. Then she went inside and made a pot of coffee and thought about 2,000 people who had spent their Saturday looking for one man, and about the particular kind of loyalty that built a thing like that. Enzo slept until 5 in the afternoon, when Petra Vasquez woke him for a proper medical check. Brianna waited in the hallway during this, which she recognized as unnecessary but did anyway, because the house was small and the hallway was where the guest room door was, and she told herself she was just being available in case she was needed. When Petra came out she said, no serious injury. Dehydration, fatigue, abraded wrists. He needs fluids, food and sleep. He will be back to himself in 24 hours. She paused. Thank you for what you did today. Both of you. Amara did the finding, Brianna said. I just made the call. Petra shook her head slightly. You stayed. That mattered. Enzo came out of the guest room 20 minutes later, looking somewhat more like a person who had slept and somewhat less like a person who had been chained to a tree. He had accepted a clean shirt from Sal, dark blue, which fit him through the shoulders with about an inch of margin, and he had washed his face. He moved through the small kitchen with the careful consideration of a very large person in a space built for smaller people, ducking slightly through doorways on instinct. Amara was at the kitchen table eating the dinner that one of the riders had brought, a proper casserole dish of baked pasta that smelled of tomato and herbs. She pointed at the chair across from her. Sit there. There is pasta. Brianna says eating is not optional. Enzo sat. Brianna set a plate in front of him and a glass of water and then sat down herself with her own plate and did not make any ceremony of it, because she had learned long ago that making ceremony of things made people feel like objects of attention rather than people at a table. After a few minutes, Enzo said, Conrad Hale runs what is left of a syndicate based out of 3 cities. He is losing ground because he is losing money, and he needed a distribution network he did not have to build himself. The club's transport program covers 22 states. He wanted access to it. And you said no, Brianna said. Several times. In increasingly clear terms. He took a drink of water. He decided that chaining me in a state park would make me reconsider. He believed no one would find me quickly enough. Amara said without looking up from her pasta. He did not account for salamander hunters. There was a silence. Enzo looked at Amara. Then he looked at Brianna, who was pressing her lips together. Then he said in a voice that did not quite manage to stay entirely steady, "No. He did not." Brianna said, "What happens now? With Hale?" "Sal has been building a file for 8 months. Hale's financial movements, his people's communications, his connections to 3 pending federal cases. We hand it to the right federal contact in the morning and Hale stops being a problem through entirely legal means." He said this with the ease of someone who had thought carefully about how to solve problems without violence and had decided that patience and documentation were more reliable than anything else. Brianna nodded slowly. She was processing the particular experience of sitting in her rented kitchen on Maple Lane eating casserole with a man who had been chained to a tree that morning and who was now calmly describing the legal dismantling of his enemy. It was an unusual Saturday by any measure. "Is there anything you need from me?" she asked. "Beyond the room and the pasta." Enzo looked at her for a moment. "You have already given me the 2 most important things," he said. "The call and the staying." The riders stayed in rotating shifts through Sunday, 3 or 4 at a time, parked along Maple Lane with the ease of people who were used to waiting. The neighbors had appeared at windows on Saturday evening and by Sunday morning had collectively decided that whatever was happening at the rented house was clearly organized and not alarming, possibly because Sal had gone door to door that morning and introduced himself and explained that his employer was recovering from an accident and that the club was providing support, and had said this so calmly and with such evident reasonableness that no one had felt the need to ask further questions. Amara spent Sunday morning showing Enzo the watershed model she and her school partner had built on the kitchen table, which she had brought from her room for this specific purpose. Enzo looked at the gray-green painted river and said, "That is the correct color." Amara looked satisfied. Brianna, watching from the doorway in her maroon robe with a mug of coffee, thought, "He is paying attention to the right things." Petra Vasquez came back Sunday morning for a follow-up check and declared Enzo's recovery ahead of schedule, which Sal relayed to the waiting riders outside with the tone of someone announcing good news at a large gathering. Brianna heard the sound of what she thought were 20 people letting out a breath they had been holding for 2 days. By Sunday afternoon, Enzo was sitting in the armchair in the small living room, and Amara had claimed the footstool near him to continue the ongoing debate she had started the previous evening about whether rivers or mountains were more important to an ecosystem. She held the river's position with some force. Enzo held the mountain's position with equal force, citing rainfall patterns, which Amara said she had not considered and would need to think about. Brianna sat across the room on the couch with her paperback open, not reading it, listening to this exchange and thinking that her rented house on Maple Lane had never felt less like a temporary stop and more like a place where something real was happening. At 4 o'clock, Sal knocked and came in and spoke quietly to Enzo for a few minutes. Brianna heard the words federal contact and tomorrow and Hale's people pulling back. She heard Enzo say in a voice that was back to its full steadiness, "Good. Make sure the file is complete before we send it. I want this done properly." After Sal left, Enzo turned to Brianna. "I would like to ask you something and I want you to know there is no correct answer." She put the paperback down. "You can ask. You and Amara have been here 3 months. She mentioned that twice. She also mentioned that the previous place before this one was also 3 months. He paused. You move a lot. Is that something you want or something that is happening to you? Brianna looked at him. It was the most precise question anyone had asked her in 2 years. She said, my ex-husband is difficult about custody arrangements. We moved to stay ahead of it. The courts are sorting it out, but it takes time. Enzo was quiet for a moment. You should not have to do that. No, she said. We should not. She looked at her paperback. But we manage. Amara is very good at managing. She is, Enzo said. She found me. The sentence sat between them for a moment with more weight than its 6 words should have carried. On Monday morning, Enzo kept his promise about the birthday. He did not make a production of it, which was, Brianna had already come to understand, characteristic of him. He simply told Sal to organize it and told Amara it was being organized and told Amara's mother what was being organized, which was a proper birthday celebration at the end of the following week, with people in it as requested. Amara received this information with the measured satisfaction of someone who had known the promise would be kept. She said, I would like a salamander cake if that is possible. Enzo said he would look into it. He looked at Brianna. She kept her expression neutral but noted that he was already looking into it before he had finished the sentence. That Monday, Enzo also told Brianna the full version of the story he had been giving her in sections. They were in the kitchen, Amara at school, Sal outside, and Enzo was at the table with a mug of coffee, which he held in both hands in the way of someone whose hands were still a little sore from the chain and the cold of the park night. He told her about the Marchetti family, what it had been and what he had decided it would not continue to be. He told her about the 7 years of work, the hotel group built from the first property he had bought with clean money, the club built from nothing into a real charitable organization with real impact. He told her about the people who had not wanted him to change course and the people who had helped him do it anyway. He told her about Conrad Hale and the 8 months of documentation and the federal contact who had been patient and who would, by end of day Monday, have everything needed to move on Hale's operation through proper channels. He told her lastly, I am not the man I was 10 years ago. I'm also not a man with a clean past. I want to be clear about that because you deserve clarity. Brianna held her own mug with both hands. Why do you want to be clear about that with me specifically? He looked at his coffee. Because Amara calls me bear and means it as a good thing, and I do not want to be something that turns out to be different than she understood. Brianna considered that for a long moment. Then she said, I am a woman who has been moving every 3 months for 2 years because my ex-husband made a series of poor choices that I am still cleaning up after. I am not in any position to require a spotless history from anyone. What I require is honesty going forward. That I can do, he said. Good. She set her mug down. Then tell me about the hotel group. I have been in clinic administration for 4 years and you are moving 12 properties with what sounds like a skeleton team. He looked at her. The look was not surprise exactly. It was more like recognition, the particular expression of someone who has been expecting to have a certain kind of conversation and is relieved that it is finally happening. 14 properties now, he said. We acquired 2 more in February. And yes, the administrative side is carrying too much weight on too few people. It is the part one am least confident about. He paused. Do you have thoughts? She had several thoughts. She shared them. He listened the same way he had listened to Amara's explanation of the river model, with the focused attention of someone who was actually using the information. By the time Amara came home from school they were still at the kitchen table, surrounded by notes Brianna had made on the back of the watershed handout Amara had left on the counter, and the coffee had gone cold and neither of them had noticed. The federal contact's name was Agent Torres, and she had been building her case for 14 months before Sal's file arrived and gave her the last 3 pieces she needed. She said this to Enzo on the phone Tuesday morning, without quite saying it was relief in her voice, though it was. Conrad Hale was taken into federal custody on Wednesday morning at 6:15, at his offices in the city without incident. Deputy Marsh confirmed to Sal that the Ridgewood situation was officially designated as part of a federal investigation, which meant Enzo's name would appear as a witness and a victim and not in any other capacity. Sal delivered all of this to Brianna's kitchen table on Wednesday afternoon with the thoroughness of a man who believed that the people who deserve to know a thing should know it clearly. It is done, he said. Hale is in federal custody. His people have scattered. The club is no longer under pressure from that direction. Brianna said, that was fast. The file was thorough, Sal said. He looked at Enzo. 8 months of thorough. Enzo said, you did the 8 months. I just decided which direction to point. Sal appeared to find this an insufficient accounting of the work, but did not say so. The rally in Millbrook Square had been planned before all of this, a quarterly gathering of the Eastern chapter of the club. It happened on the Saturday after Amara's birthday celebration, which had featured a salamander cake that turned out to be entirely possible because Petra Vasquez knew a baker in the city who could do custom frosting work and did not ask why. Amara's birthday had people in it. 37 of them, which was more people than she had been in a room with in a social context in most of a year. Writers, and Sal and Petra, and the neighbors from Maple Lane who had come because Sal had invited them on a Saturday morning, and Brianna's sister who had driven down from 2 hours away and had looked at Enzo Marchetti for about 4 seconds before deciding, with the speed of someone who had known her sister a long time, that she approved. Amara had received a proper birthday. She had said at the end of it, sitting on the porch with the salamander cake box in her lap, this was the one I wanted. Enzo, sitting in the chair beside her, had said, good, and meant it in the particular way of someone who does not make promises they cannot keep. The Millbrook Square rally gathered 400 of the club's Eastern chapter members. Enzo spoke from the back of a flatbed truck, without notes, about the community center project the club was funding in 3 cities and about the transport program's expansion. He was not a polished speaker. He was a clear one, which is different and, Brianna thought, better. She stood at the edge of the crowd in her red dress, the bright clean red that she had bought for the event because she had decided it was time to wear something that felt like herself again, and she watched 2,000 people applaud a man who had been chained to a tree 9 days ago and thought about the distance between those two images. The charity gala was held at the Marchetti Group's flagship hotel in the city, a building that had been a bank in a previous century and had kept its carved ceilings and its tall windows and added everything else with the taste of someone who understood that the bones of a beautiful building should not be hidden under too many additions. Brianna wore emerald green. It was a proper formal dress, the kind she had not had occasion to wear in several years, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that moved when she walked, and she had bought it that week with the deliberateness of someone making a decision about more than a dress. Her auburn hair was down and she wore her grandmother's pearl earrings, and she walked into the hotel on Enzo's arm because he had offered it and she had taken it, which she recognized as its own kind of decision. The hotel's ballroom had been arranged for the gala with long tables and candles and the club's emblem on the programs, but the real centerpiece was the announcement at the end of the dinner: the first Marchetti Community Center to be built in the city's East District, fully funded by the club's charitable foundation. Sal made the announcement because Enzo did not want the evening to be about him. Brianna had heard him say this to Sal in the car on the way over: "It is about what we are building, not who is building it." Sal had said, "That is a very noble thing to say, boss, and you are still going to have to stand up when they applaud." Enzo had said, "I will stand briefly." He had stood briefly. The applause had not been brief. Amara was at the gala because she had asked to come, and Enzo had said yes before Brianna had finished considering the question. She sat at the table between Brianna and Sal and ate her dinner with the focused pleasure of someone taking a formal occasion seriously, and she asked Sal 3 questions about the community center's design, all of which Sal answered with equal seriousness. After the announcement and the applause, and after the dancing had started, Enzo found Brianna near the tall windows that looked out over the city's lights. He stood beside her for a moment, looking out. Then he turned to face her. He said, "I have been thinking about what you told me in the kitchen. About moving every 3 months. About Amara not having a real birthday for 2 years." Brianna turned to look at him. She waited. He said, "I have a house. It is a proper house, not the kind of place a person passes through. It has a yard and a creek at the back edge of the property, and Amara told me she has never had a yard with a creek in it." "She told you that?" Brianna said. "Last Tuesday. Over the watershed model." He paused. "I want you and Amara to stop moving. I want you to stop running from a man who is not going to be able to make things difficult for you much longer, because the same people who handled the Hale situation are aware of your ex-husband's pattern and have an opinion about it. I have made sure of that." Brianna was quiet for a moment. "You did that without telling me. I should have told you. I am telling you now." He held her gaze. "I am also asking you to marry me, and I understand if the answer is that it is too fast, because it is too fast by most measures. But I have found that the things that matter tend to arrive without asking permission about the timing." She looked at him. This enormous, tattooed, careful man who had listened to her daughter explain river colors with full attention, who had kept a birthday promise to an 8-year-old with a precision that still moved her, who had spent 8 months building a legal case instead of reaching for any other kind of solution, who had said, "I want to be clear about that because you deserve clarity." She said, "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay," in exactly the same tone he had used in the woods when Amara had said she would come back, which was the tone of someone who had expected the world to organize itself a certain way and was steady with gratitude now that it had. Across the ballroom, Amara was explaining the importance of watershed accuracy to Sal, who was listening with the same attention his boss always used. When Brianna found her at the end of the evening and told her what had happened by the tall windows, Amara was quiet for a moment and then said, "I knew when I saw him in the woods." Brianna said, "What did you know?" Amara considered this with the gravity of an 8-year-old who has thought carefully about something real. "I knew he was the kind of person who needed finding." She looked at the ballroom. "And that we were the kind of people who find." They were married in the spring at the house with the yard and the creek, with 2012 riders in attendance and 1 red salamander spotted by Amara in the creek bed during the reception, which she announced to anyone who would listen was a very good sign. The Marchetti Group became fully legitimate before the summer was out. The community centers, 3 of them by then, opened on the same day in 3 cities. Sal gave a speech at the first one that was longer than anyone expected and better than anyone had been prepared for. Enzo Marchetti called himself retired from the old life and building something worth keeping in the new one. His wife ran the administrative operation of 14 hotels with the efficiency of someone who had spent 4 years learning exactly which systems mattered and which ones were just noise. Amara called him Bear for the rest of her life.